Over the last couple of weeks, I've seen quite a few new releases, all of which I very easily could have done videos on. I've seen The Running Man, The Life of Chuck, Now You See Me, Now You Don't, Love Plus War, The Thing with Feathers, and I even have caught up on The Long Walk, which I absolutely adored. However, out of all the things I've seen recently, there is one film in particular that absolutely floored me and I knew I wanted to do a video on right from the word go, and that is Clint Bentley's Train Dreams, which is now available to watch on Netflix. Now, me wanting to do a video on this film specifically, more so than the other ones that I mentioned, isn't a disservice to the ones that I mentioned. I like all of those films in their own right, but this one kind of just came out of nowhere and absolutely knocked me sideways. It's a film that I don't think is getting talked about as much as it should, and I wanted to highlight it here because it is that good. The premise of Train Dreams is very simple. We follow a logger in early 20th century America and basically just follow his life as the world changes around him. That's literally all you need to know, and that's kind of all the film goes for. This is very much one of those films that doesn't rely very heavily on a plot. It is literally just you observing a person's life and everything that goes on around it. And when it comes to those sorts of films, I can find they can be very hit and miss. Sometimes they can be very beautiful and artistic and have something meaningful to say. I think quite a few Terrence Malick films do this job very well. However, there are other films that try to do that same style and they come across a bit too artsy and lean more towards the pretentious side. Again, Terrence Malick can also do that. Sometimes he produces an absolute masterpiece, and other times he can just produce this slow burn thing that doesn't really go anywhere and it's just pretentious for the sake of being pretentious. Train Dreams, on the other hand, feels like it leans more in the positive side of things. It's got a purpose to it, and by the time the film is wrapped up, it really does hit you round the face in terms of the core theme it was trying to get across in the first place, which may have not been evident from the start. Now, I'm going to be honest, when this film dropped on Netflix last week, I genuinely didn't know much about it. The only reason I had heard of it and knew to check it out was because it played at the London Film Festival, and I heard a lot of people absolutely raving about it and really hyping it up, which is always seems to be the case whenever I attend the London Film Festival, is that I see the bunch of films that I see, and I like a lot of them, and I don't like some of them. And there always happens to be one or two films that were not on my radar, that I had no idea about, that everyone seems to love, that just passed me by. And then I have to end up catching them after the festival and hoping that it lives up to the hype. Train Dreams is one of those films, and thankfully everyone who was hyping it up back in October was right. This film is an absolute beautiful piece of filmmaking. This is quite easily one of the best looking films of the entire year. The way this film is shot feels very grounded, dirty and gritty, but also has this dreamlike feel to it that is honestly mesmerising. That is probably the best word I can use to sum up this film in a nutshell, is that the entire thing just kind of is mesmerising. Even when things aren't really happening and you're just observing life, in other films, like I said previously, it can come across as a bit too slow and just artsy for the sake of being artsy. But this film has such a clear purpose to it in terms of the longevity of the theme it's trying to tell within its runtime. And I think a lot of those smaller moments within this film really do add up to something a lot grander that I honestly wasn't expecting. Because that's another thing I was not expecting from this film. I knew it would be rather meditative and a bit slow in places, but I was not expecting to have such a gut punch reaction to some of the emotional scenes in this film like the way I did, because there are some moments that are very sweet and just beautiful to look at in terms of what the characters are doing, but also how it's captured. But then there are other scenes that just rip your heart out both for the character, but also as you as an audience member as well. I just want to go back to the cinematography as well, because I can't honestly get enough of it. Don't get me wrong, the performances are fantastic throughout this film, whether it's Joel Edgerton, Felicity Jones, or even William H. Macy. They are all fantastic in this movie, but the one thing that absolutely floored me more than anything was the cinematography. The entire thing is shot in a 4:3 aspect ratio, and I'm pretty sure the whole thing is shot on film. And you can really tell because there are certain scenes that just have a sort of texture and grittiness to them that you don't see in some films recently. And it really pays off, especially not just for the time period that this film is set in, but also because of the tone that it's trying to go for as well. This film relies a lot on natural light, whether it be, golden hour in the morning or the evening, or just relying on candles and flames or the sun. The way this film uses natural light is one of the best uses I've seen of it in quite a while. I know there are some films that use it quite extensively. I know Chloe Zhao is quite a big user of natural light and tries to avoid using deliberately lit scenes as best as possible. And she does a really good job of using those. But here it felt really purposeful, really effective, and it just really worked. I actually saw a TikTok the other day that best summed up Train Dreams more so than I think I ever could. And I'm going to paraphrase here, it's not going to be word for word. But what they said was essentially Train Dreams feels like a Terrence Malick film if someone was in the editing room with Terrence Malick and actually restrained his vision and actually made it into a more concise package. That is by far the best description I've heard for this film. There are a lot of scenes, or almost 90% of the film does feel like someone attempting to copy Terrence Malick's style. And as much as I like Terrence Malick as a filmmaker, I think a lot of people, myself included, do feel the same way, whereby a lot of his films, after a certain point, do feel as if they can be very meandering, and that's even, proof in the final project, whereby he doesn't really have a clear vision going into it. He kind of just takes what was shot on set and kind of cobbles it together in the edit to make something new. That was infamous with The Thin Red Line. I think he even did a little bit of that on The Tree of Life. But he goes in with a few random ideas in mind on set and then just cobbles stuff together in the edit, which is when you can get shots that last maybe a bit too long or scenes that just kind of go nowhere. Even though they are beautiful, again, they go nowhere. Train Dreams is the best example of a Terrence Malick film that was never made by Terrence Malick, but also shows a lot of restraint and conciseness. This film is only 102 minutes long, and to be honest, I feel like if it had gone any longer, it might have outstayed its welcome, but because it is such a concise runtime, it knows that it never outstays its welcome, and it never feels like any particular scene lasts too long. Just when you feel like a scene is starting to kind of go nowhere or slow down, it will very abruptly or very cleanly go to the next thing. And I really like it when a filmmaker acknowledges that element from the audience or even in themselves, whereby they can see for themselves that a scene is maybe going on a bit too long, let's just move to the next thing. That being said, this film also knows how to take its time without being too slow. There are some artsy films out there that can just meander and go very, very, very slowly, more so than they probably need to. Train Dreams has, in my opinion, the perfect pacing. Yes, it can be quite slow, but it's never too slow. It pretty much goes at a pace that suits the main character in the sense that he is just kind of existing and plodding through life until he realizes that the world has completely changed around him and he's now completely alone and doesn't quite know what this world is that it's become. And I feel like the pacing probably best reflects that as well, because it starts off as one thing and then kind of evolves into this other thing by the end. and the pacing really does do a good job of reflecting that. It's never too slow, but it's also never too fast as well. It just kind of gradually plods along at this pace, and it just works. There is also a narration throughout the whole movie that basically reinforces a lot of the things that we're seeing the main character go through on screen. I've seen a few people criticize the narration purely because it's doing the audience's job for them in terms of there's some pretty visuals, there's a scene playing out, the narration is kind of force feeding what's happening down our throats. I personally didn't feel that. I think it does a really good job of having it feel very old-timey and almost storybookish in terms of its feel. It's probably the only element of the film that comes across like a storybook, and I thought it was a nice little touch. They didn't have to go that route, but I feel like it kind of adds an extra layer of something to the film. Honestly, if you have Netflix, I cannot recommend Train Dreams enough. I feel like it might sneak into some of the awards buzz going into next year, but there is also a part of me that feels like it could get swept under the rug because it is a Netflix film. Honestly, do not skip this one. It is a beautiful, poetic bit of filmmaking that has brilliant performances and utterly stunning cinematography. I think the only downside is the fact that it is on Netflix, and I would have really liked to have seen this in a cinema and got the full weight and scale of it. It's a very quiet and subtle film, but its emotional weight really does sneak up on you and really kind of hits you around the head when you least expect it. If you've seen Train Dreams, let me know what you think about it in the comments below. I would love to have a discussion about it down there. If you like this video, then give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already, and I will see you all in the next one. Bye.